I'm Faye Brightman's daughter, and I'm pleased to be here today with my two sisters, Susan and Maxine, and we're going to tell you a little bit about Mom's history. Hopefully, some of the things that we mention will be familiar to the others here, things that you've experienced and you're familiar with as well. Our mother, Faye Early, was born on May 13, 1915, during a really terrible blizzard. The roads were so bad, the doctor couldn't come. He couldn't get through with his horse and buggy until well after she was born. Once he arrived, he looked her over briefly, and she weighed less than 3 pounds, and he suggested she probably wouldn't live until morning, and look at her now. So he was a little off in his calculations and didn't realize the determination in our family. Here's a pair of Mom's first shoes, and it says on the bottom, Faye Early 1916. So she wore those when she was 3. That's how tiny, tiny she was, even when she was 3 years old. Mom's father was the veterinary surgeon for this area. When she was very young, he took her with him on his travels around to see the farmers and help with the animals. And he had her sit in the kitchen and behave like a little lady while he went out to the barn. So he had no problem at all taking his little daughter with him. When the First World War began, he was made a captain in the Army Veterinary Corps. He was injured in Europe, and he arrived back in Kingston, Ontario, where he passed away.
Oh my.
Leaving his wife and 3-year-old daughter, Faye, and her young brother. In the Legion Hall in Regina is a photo, or in the Legion Hall in Regina is some information which I've got buried here, but I won't pass around, of different things of his, including his veterinary bag and his instruments, and some medals and photos. And there's also pennies, which were given to Mom as she visited around the other people in his ward. So there must be 8 or 10 or 12 pennies that were kept through the years, and they're in a display box in the Legion in Regina. And I will find the display, or the photo of the display. When Mom was 8 years old, her widowed mother decided to move to California. Mom often would tell the story of their train ride to California and how her little brother ran through the train to the last car and out the door before she could catch up to him, and she caught him in midair just as he was flying off the back of the train. She hung on to the train with one hand and onto him with the other until someone came to the rescue. Once more, she tempted fate and won. Right? Do you remember that? Do you remember? No, you've forgotten that now. They arrived safely in California and lived first at Venice Beach, and then her mother was hired to look after a Spanish villa in Hollywood, where some of the renters were involved in the movie industry. This was a real change from Saskatchewan farm life. I have a photo here of Mom and her brother dressed, do you remember that? Dressed for a parade She's dressed in a Hawaiian outfit, and her brother is dressed as a little Dutch boy. I'd like to pass that around. In 1928, several women had been killed in the Hollywood area. And one dark and stormy Sunday afternoon, in their villa home, my grandmother and her sister, our Aunt Georgia, were preparing dinner while Mom and her brother were playing in the bedroom. A couple of male guests were sitting at the table in the corner of the living room. They weren't visible from outside. Suddenly, the front door flew open and a huge man stormed into the middle of the room. As this happened, the men stood up and their chairs scraped on the floor, and shocked to hear the noise, he turned around and looked at them, excused himself in a thick Scandinavian accent, saying that he had the wrong place, and he ran out into the night. My grandmother just knew the intruder was the Hollywood Strangler. Within hours, they were on a train headed back to safe Saskatchewan. And 6 months later, they got a Winnipeg newspaper, and there he was. The stranger's picture was on the front page. Knowing they could identify him, he may have followed their train, and he may have even been on it. He didn't know where they got off, so he must have gone on to Winnipeg. He was caught at that time attempting to murder another woman. Sure enough, he had a Scandinavian accent, and once again a close call, and this time our grandmother's intuition saved the day. Do you remember anything else about that? So, I didn't hear this story. Pardon?
I remember some.
She had to leave her girlfriends behind. That was
And one of her girlfriends married one of the famous directors.
We don't know.
What we have to pass around next is her autograph book. You'll see her friends from Hollywood in the book in 1928, and in 1929, her friends from Siemens.
Well, they wrote little sayings that were fun. And they were just playing around.
The Charleston was a new dance in California in 1928, and Mom brought the Charleston with her when she came back to Saskatchewan. So she had fun dancing the Charleston and teaching all of her friends how to dance it when there weren't too many people that had even heard about it at that time in Saskatchewan. They'd only imagine. Is that right? Yeah. Mom's mother was a seamstress and a hairdresser. She really enjoyed doing Mom's hair in all sorts of fancy, popular styles at the time. And one of Mom's schoolmates loved to mimic her. She'd have her mother try to do the same hairstyle. I don't know whether Mom was just a trickster or whether she didn't like the other girl copying her. But she had her mom do her hair in a bob so that it looked like it was cut short. And pretty soon the other girl came to school with her hair cut in a bob, and then the next day Mom came to school with her hair down long. Is that something you remember? Do you remember this? Do you remember who the girl was that did that? No. Mom was quite an impressive young artist. Copies of a collection of her artwork have been copied and put on here. So This is quite a prized possession that we have several of her artworks. Susan, do you want to pass that on for people to see? Those are all sketches that she did when she was 13. Unfortunately for us, her talent was passed down, and now my daughter Laura is an artist and an art teacher living in Portland, Oregon. About the time that Mom was finishing school in Siemens, the family, including her grandparents, left Saskatchewan and moved to Toronto, where they were living at the beginning of the Second World War. In Toronto, Mom met up with our dad, who was from Raymore, and they were married, and their first two daughters, Maxine and myself, were born in Toronto. Shortly before Maxine's birth, Mom's brother Jim was killed in England on a training flight, and Mom left Maxine with her mother while she worked at the post office to try to get her out of the depression she was in over losing her son. Our dad was sent to Halifax, where he was training as a medic, and those were very difficult times for so many families. Mom's father and brother are both listed on the cenotaph in Siemens, and remembered each year at the service. And here's their names on the list. Did you see that? Susan, would you like to pass that over? The family, including our grandparents, eventually moved back to Saskatchewan and settled in Siemens and Regina, where our two young sisters, Alice and Susan, were born. While we were growing up, Mom worked at Simpson's in Regina, in the luggage department and the toy department. Now, one little story I thought would be fun to relate here. Mom often would mention a very eccentric woman from Siemens who stopped by in the luggage department one day with a very dilapidated old suitcase. And she wanted Mom to take it home and keep it at her house for a few days. Well, you can imagine the razzing that Mom got as she checked out at 6 o'clock at night, coming from the luggage department and having this horrible old suitcase with her. And some of the comments were, "Stop that woman, she's stealing the merchandise," and big laughs over it. Mom's grandchildren always had a great time visiting at the farm, feeding the kittens, and enjoying the freedom of farm life, and they particularly loved being around their grandma, who was consistently even-tempered, gentle, and kind. Now, will you agree with me? Yes, she'll agree. She really was gentle, even-tempered, and kind. She had a wonderful garden and lots of flowers every year. She canned loads of tomatoes from her garden, and very often the meal at lunch or dinner included a poached egg from their chickens and a dish of tomatoes from